graphic design and marketing for the Institute. I'm new, I joined the Live-In in January of this year, so I look forward to meeting many of you in the future. Many of you know Dawn Smith. Dawn, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks for inviting us today. As you heard, I'm the communications coordinator for the Live-In Institute, and I know a lot of you have been here 5 years, and I'm excited to present today. So today we're going to be talking about how you can promote your work through the Live-In Cardiovascular Institute marketing team, which is made up of Stacey and myself, and how we can help you to tell your stories and promote your work. We'll also be discussing why a social media presence is important in the medical and academic community and providing some tips on getting started on Twitter. We're going to have some special guests speaking today, Dr. Jason Weatherald and Dr. Satish Raj. They're going to be joining us and sharing their experience on these topics. So the first question we would like to address today is, why is it important to promote your work and the work of your colleagues and trainees? All of us are aware that Calgary is home to some of the best cardiac care in Canada, and that our members are known on a national and even global stage as experts in their fields. But unless they've had direct experience, many members of the public aren't aware of the world-class facility that exists here. Stacey and I are working to change that. So by promoting your work, we hope to raise the profile of our cardiac programs, attract recruits and trainees, facilitate clinical and research collaborations, and attract donations to further your innovations and research. But what's in it for you? Many of us shy away from self-promotion, but promoting your publications, clinical innovations, grants, and awards draws attention to the fact that you're an expert in your field. It also may be important for career advancement and for networking and making connections with others in your field. I'm going to hand it over to Stacey, who's going to delve deeper into why having a digital presence is important for medical and academic professionals.
Thanks, Dawn. The internet has become a main source of information with approximately 4 billion people worldwide using it. In the last 10 years, social media has grown to become one of the main methods of communication online, with an estimated 3.2 billion active users. Did you know that 70% of Canadians use the internet to search for medical or health-related information? In fact, the internet, rather than physicians, is the first source of information for many people. Nearly 75% of all patients search the internet immediately before or after a visit to their healthcare provider to seek advice or gather information about their diagnosis or treatment. A third of patients self-diagnose, and 33% actually don't even seek a professional opinion afterwards. In a recent survey, about 40% of respondents said that social media impacts their healthcare decisions, and 90% of young adults indicated that they would trust information shared by others on social media networks. The growing reliance on social media shows the importance of the medium for communication, health, and research-related topics. While there are obvious drawbacks to people using social media for their health information, these platforms also provide nearly limitless potential to positively impact health. We need professionals to have a strong presence on the internet to combat medical misinformation that is available online. The good news is most healthcare professionals use the internet, and 80% reported active use. And this is especially true for the new generation of physicians. In fact, 95% of emerging physicians report daily social media engagement. So I just want to get see what you guys think. In the chat box, can you let me know what you think are the benefits of social media for cardiovascular professionals? I'll give you a moment to put some answers in.
So Stace, we have information sharing, health promotion, and translation of research findings, find out about new articles, meeting updates. Dr. Fedak, make me famous. Dr. Marilla says updates.
Awesome, yeah. So there's an article that was published in the US Cardiology Review. Campbell listed 6 benefits of using social media for cardiovascular professionals. Those were increased meaningful interactions with colleagues. Network online dialogue could lead to collaborations and innovations such as crowdsourcing of difficult and rare cases. There was an increased peer emotional social support. More available, tailored, and shared information that's science-based and trustworthy. An increased accessibility and widening access to health information. Public health surveillance, and a potential to influence healthcare policy. Some other benefits include a two-way dialogue with patients and their families. You can share important health messages and new findings. Information can be shared widely and immediately. Social media communication is cost effective and even free, and also can be really good for study recruitment. Many scientific journals are on social media, and they share the latest articles and promoting discussion amongst the medical community. Using social media platforms has been linked to an immediate increase in visibility for scientific papers. And scientific meeting organizers use social media to enhance their reach. Social media provides a way to disseminate the latest research being presented at these conferences. A couple examples. The European Society of Cardiology prioritizes Twitter and has more than 115,000 followers. They actively encourage live sharing at their cardiovascular science at their congresses. And in 2019, the ESC Congress had 13,000 Twitter users tweet more than 65,000 times. A couple popular social media champions in the cardiovascular health and research are Dr. Martha Galati and Dr. Mamas Mamas. Dr. Galati has almost 38,000 followers, and Dr. Mamas Mamas has almost 42,000. These people are pros not only in promoting their own work on social media, but creating interesting content for a wide range of audiences. If you haven't already, I recommend checking them out and seeing how they use their Twitter accounts to further their positions as professionals in the cardiovascular medical space on Twitter. I'd like to introduce one of our own social media champions, Dr. Jason Wetherell, to talk about his own experiences being part of the medical community on Twitter. Dr. Wetherell is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Medicine. He's a respirologist with the Southern Alberta Pulmonary Hypertension Program at the Peter Lougheed Center. His research examines pathophysiology of pulmonary vascular disease. He wasn't able to join us this morning, so we've actually pre-recorded his segment. So I'm just going to cue that up here for you.
So good morning, Jason. Dr. Wetherald, I appreciate you coming out and chatting a little bit more about social media. So first off, can you tell us about your history of how you've been using social media?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I started mostly on Twitter using social media, and I initially got on it after a talk here through the Libin. There was a cardiologist, Dr. Zeroth from Winnipeg, who gave a rounds about 2 years ago about using social media to sort of advance your academic career. And so that was my motivation for getting onto it. And I tried to follow like her general guidance on how to use it. I mean, I think it is a really powerful tool for academics. And I've also found that it's a really useful medium for continuing medical education and also education of residents and fellows. It's a really great way to share interesting cases. And I found these things called tweetorials where someone will sort of pre-write out a whole case-based learning or sort of a mini lecture that can be delivered over Twitter. And they're really good little digestible nuggets that can help with educating your peers or spreading a message regarding your research or medical education. So I do think it's a really great tool.
Awesome. Are those tutorials shared through hashtags, or how do you find that?
There are several ways. Like there are hashtags like MedTwitter, or disease specific hashtags where someone will add that to the tutorial thread, and so they end up reaching the audience that sort of follows those hashtags. I think that there's a lot of very influential people as well on Twitter that will, because of their algorithms, show up more frequently than others. But then there's also topics I think that it knows that you're interested in, so it will show those to you. So sometimes you just find them serendipitously, and other times you can go looking for them as well. I also find that they're really useful around the time of conferences, major conferences. People will have a thread or a mini tutorial about a recent trial that has just been published at a conference. And that's a really great way, I think, to disseminate information as it comes out, and to get the expert's opinion on a major trial. I think I find out more about new things on Twitter than I do through most other venues now.
Wow, that's really interesting. Is there, do you ever use sort of the crowdsourcing, as in, see, you might have a difficult case? Have you ever been involved in anything like that?
Yeah, I've done that a couple of times through our PERT group, which is the Pulmonary Embolism Response Team, which is kind of a multidisciplinary group, including intensive care, pulmonary emergency physicians, where we've had challenging case with pulmonary embolism and right heart failure, and we've sort of asked how people would do things in a certain situation. Obviously, on Twitter, you can't. You have to make sure you're respecting the patient on whom the case is based. All sorts of confidentiality issues, so you do have to be really careful about how you describe cases and that there's no identifiable information. But it can be I've done a couple of polls in terms of how would you manage this aspect of the case. You can give 4 options, and you can get people from all over the world who are experts or members of consortiums to weigh in on the best practice or best management for a patient where perhaps the evidence isn't clear.
Interesting. And how, like you sort of touched on how this all has benefited your career, but do you also share your own work on there?
Yeah, I actually think that's the most useful thing about it, is actually knowledge translation and dissemination, is getting more eyes on your work. And I'll give you a great example of how this worked perfectly. Is we just published a paper last week with one of our fellows here, looking at we did a critical evaluation of the accuracy and quality of internet websites for a certain disease that I'm interested in, pulmonary hypertension. Obviously, we're in an era of mass misinformation, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet that isn't accurate. And this project aimed to critically evaluate the top 200 websites that we found on this topic and rank them in terms of their quality and transparency and reliability of information. So we published this paper last week, and I tweeted out about it. And some of the foundations or advocacy groups that showed up quite high in our ranking got interested in it, and we just did Dr. Dana Saleh and I just did an interview with this UK-based patient advocacy group this morning, because they wanted to highlight the fact that they had shown up really high in our list of things. And what I found, what's great about this is this paper easily could have just gotten buried on the bookshelves of medical research, but I think Twitter is this went out through Twitter. They contacted me through Twitter, and I think this will help get our results to the people that we actually wanted to see it, which are the clinicians, but most importantly, the patients with this disease. The whole purpose of the study was to give them a list of accurate online resources to educate themselves about their disease. And I think now this organization, PHA UK, will be able to get this study and translate it to the people that need to hear about it, and ultimately improving patient knowledge and education. So I think Twitter was really the way that happened. I don't know if it would have been picked up otherwise.
Interesting. So given that you're kind of using it for knowledge translation, how do you handle, like, a lot of academics potentially speak in academia? So can you give any tips for sort of translating in a lay language?
Yeah, I think especially with social media, you have to, big medical words take up a lot of characters. So if you need to get your message out succinctly and in a way that will be digestible by people. So I think it's really important to write these things out first before you tweet them out there. And I'm guilty of this too. Sometimes you get excited about things and you make spelling mistakes, or autocorrect fixes something, and it changes the meaning of what you're trying to say, and you have to delete it and redo it. And so I think, it's just like writing. We generally will write things in a Word document before you tweet it out. And I think your point in question is a really good one, is making sure that people can understand what you're talking about, and not just academics. But if you're trying to target other people, like the patients that follow you, who you want to get that information out to, or funding agencies or patient organizations, is make sure that it's a brief, digestible, relevant, and understandable.
Awesome. And so I take it that your professional social media is basically Twitter. You don't foray into the other platforms much?
No, I haven't been on Facebook since university. And I think from what I've heard, it has exploded into a bit of a misinformation platform than an information platform. And then so that Twitter's really the only one I've gotten into, because I think it's professionally a lot more useful, and it's more about words and information and less about images, for instance. So I just find it the most useful way to do things in a quick manner that's not too distracting.
Awesome. Perfect. So speaking of sort of the misinformation out there, how do you handle comments that might be, because you are a respirologist, so, COVID, do you have any anecdotes about people coming back at you with interesting comments? Or?
Yeah, I mean, this is that's a huge topic. I mean, I think anonymity on the internet emboldens a lot of people to do and say things that they normally wouldn't do, and Twitter is equally bad for this. And I've found on politically sensitive topics, even though they shouldn't be, things like vaccines. I'm a respirologist, and I do a lot of COVID work as well, and anything that has to do with COVID or vaccines will seem to trigger a lot of negative responses from people. And unfortunately, it's even materialized into threats, like personal threats against me from anonymous accounts. And I think, unfortunately, social media platforms don't do a great job of policing this and regulating it, especially with people who are anonymous. There are also these things called bots. So these are like fake accounts that are programmed, and they will pick up any keywords like vaccines and just post, vitriol back at you. And it's automated, and it's meant to, for whatever reason, cause divisions and controversy. So try to keep that in mind, that some of these things aren't even real people; they're just fake accounts. So I think a good strategy is to just block them and report them, and try to minimize the impact of these people. But it can be a concerning thing, when you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about things that you know about, and then people that don't know much about them have opinions about them, and it gets very politically charged. So I've been more recently trying to stay away from those topics and focusing more just on my own research and connecting with people in academia that are interested in similar things like me.
Awesome. So basically ignore, move on.
Yeah, try to, but it's hard, and they can be very these people or accounts can be extremely inflammatory.
Wow. I know we've noticed it as well. So it's really an interesting thing. So we really enjoy reading your feed, your tweets, everything that you share. I think it's the personal bit that you put in there. You actually have a personality when you're on social media. So how do you handle that sort of sharing a little bit about yourself, or showing that you're kind of a funny guy, with being professional?
Yeah, I think that's a fine line to walk, and sometimes perhaps I step over it a little bit. I mean, I think another useful forum for Twitter is to sort of vent about the inefficiencies and difficulties that we have as an academic. And I think if we don't talk about those things in some forum, they just get shoved down. And I think there's a lot of problems in academia that contribute to burnout, and I've been increasingly vocal about that problem in academia. And you find actual solutions from other people. And for instance, I've connected with a pulmonary critical care doctor who's a program director somewhere in the States, and actually went through his feed and found some really good resources and sort of strategies for helping protect yourself, like when you're on vacation. Like he has a whole thread about, how to handle emails and the volume of emails you get when you're on vacation, so that you're able to compartmentalize that part of your life and not bring it with you when you're actually supposed to be off. And so I think from the personal standpoint, it's useful to share those things, because your colleagues are going through the same things and we all struggle with the same problems. And you can actually find useful strategies through people you would have otherwise connected with.
Wow. So it sounds like community building is a big part of why you're doing this. Yeah. I think the final question would be, considering that we're kind of chatting about the world of cardiovascular research, are there like 2 or 3 folks that you could recommend to new Twitter users that they could maybe follow or maybe emulate?
Yeah, I think probably in cardiovascular medicine, one of the more prominent people is Martha Gulati, who has over 30,000 followers, and she's very great at communicating health information, not just to other cardiologists and people interested in cardiovascular health, but also to patients. So I would say that's probably one of the people with the biggest impact. And I think even within our own institute, there are people that tweet a lot of really interesting stuff, like Dr. Sophia Ahmed, who does a lot of research on sex and gender, and I think that's a real strength here. So I think, even just following people within our own institute who do and share great work on Twitter is a really good start. And look at who those people follow and retweet, because those are the heavy hitters in the field. So I think in cardiovascular medicine, it's really interesting because you actually don't have just cardiologists. There's cardiologists, there's nephrologists, there's internists, there's people who are basic scientists, there's respirologists like me who really care about half of the heart. So there's a lot of people that you can network with, and just look at who they're tweeting about. There's a lot of other really great scientists as well out there. There's another guy, Michael Gibson, who's an interventional cardiologist in Boston, who does a lot of really great stuff about just general science translation, cardiovascular health, but he's also an artist. And so he will post these beautiful photos of like paintings that he's done. And I think that's speaks to what you've talked about, like making it personal. So you engage more people that way, I think. So that's probably the second person I'd highly recommend following.
Awesome. Jason, is there anything else that you'd want to share with everyone about this topic?
Yeah, I think, as clinicians and healthcare providers, we are advocates for patients and also the healthcare system. And healthcare is increasingly political. And so I think it's really hard to stay out of the politics of healthcare on social media. But as I mentioned before, same with vaccine politics, if you get into healthcare politics, you have to be prepared for an onslaught of very angry, anonymous people coming at you. So if you don't want that, you really need to try to stay away from the advocacy part of it. But I do think it's an important role that we all serve, but there are consequences. And unfortunately, until they figure out a way to moderate and police that, you have to have some thick skin.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing today. I hope you get a whole bunch of new Twitter friends after this. That's the goal.
It sounds great. Thanks for the chat today. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jason.
So I just wanted to thank Dr. Weatherald for sharing his knowledge on Twitter, and he actually was presenting at a different rounds this morning. So now I want to chat a little bit about storytelling. So as experts, you have knowledge that the public needs. In this age of misinformation, the importance of sound health advice backed by science is critical. As the Institute Communications and Marketing team, it's our job to share your knowledge in a compelling way to as many audiences as possible. So now we have to chat about kind of how we do that. We recognize that connection to stories is a universal trait. So the key to our communications and marketing strategy is storytelling. We look for ways to connect with our audiences through storytelling techniques to encourage them to understand, remember, and ultimately take some action that will benefit them. But we can only share the stories that we're aware of. That's where you guys come in. We're always interested in hearing about your accomplishments and the accomplishments of all of our members, trainees, and other stakeholders. So please share if you're aware of clinical innovations, grants and awards, publications and studies within the department, even if they're not yours. So I want to chat a little bit about key messages. So key messages are the main points of information that you want your audience to hear, understand, and remember. Understanding the key message in any piece is vital for us communicators, as understanding these allows us to craft impactful stories that help get your main points across. Consider this powerful key message. 80% of cardiovascular conditions are preventable. So if the public actually truly understood that message, it could change lives. Another example taken from a story I wrote about a year ago about the nurse practitioner-led CCU at Rocky View General Hospital, which is one of the first in Canada to operate under this model, is this key message. It's a little bit more complex, but having nurse practitioners lead the CCU creates consistency and continuity in coverage and can result in better experiences and outcomes for patients. That key message is actually a quote, so perfect having it in someone else's voice as well. But with the right audience, that is an extremely powerful message that could have the potential to change healthcare delivery and healthcare policy even. Considering your audience is also important in considering what information you want to share. Your audience is the person or people you want to communicate with. Once you know your key message, it's important to consider who you're trying to share that message with. The better you understand your audience, the easier it is to craft your message. As communicators, our audience is often the public, so we aim to write for a junior high audience, believe it or not, and we try to omit as much jargon as possible. Our goal is to make our messages easy to digest, remember, and act upon. So unless you are aiming for an academic audience, please don't deter folks by using language that's too complex or filled with medical terms. You can ask yourself, how would I explain this to my non-academic friends and family? But how will you know if you have an interesting story to tell? So this is interesting. So I think there's storytelling techniques that can be used to share even the most complex information. And Stacey and I can help you find your key messages and audiences and turn those into stories, not just traditional stories, but other types of sharing that people can engage and connect with. This can help raise your profile in the community. For example, the Ross procedure recently completed by the surgical team at the Foothills is a very complex cardiac surgery. But after chatting with the folks involved, we were able to simplify how this is done. We paired it with a compelling image and shared it on social media. The post reached more than 25,000 people and received a lot of positive comments. Some of those you can see above. So please don't underestimate the public's interest in your work. Even things that are mundane for you are likely highly interesting for the public. I always think of all the dramas on doctors. There's got to be a reason for that. I would like to chat briefly now about where we can share your stories. So we control a number of platforms within the Institute. So we have the news feed, which is on the Libin website homepage, a monthly newsletter that goes out to more than 700 internal and external folks. You Today, we've had the magazine that's published annually, AHS external and internal news sites and emails, and social media offers lots of opportunities. We can even pitch your stories to the local media. Each of these platforms is suitable for different types of stories. For example, You Today might be best for sharing a traditional print media story and videos, while a social media platform like Instagram is best for content with compelling videos and images. So before I share some recent success stories that demonstrate key features in news writing, I am wondering how many of you have had experience with the media. Please use a reaction button, if you can see it on the screen below, to give me a thumbs up, or I don't actually care what icon you use, to let me know if you've actually been interviewed by a journalist. Awesome. I hope the experience was good for everyone. It isn't always. Great, thank you, everyone. So now I want to talk about some of the elements that make stories compelling to the public. So these are sort of key things that journalists will think about. So human interest stories and things that are out of the ordinary can be of great interest to the public. These types of stories don't happen every day, but when they do, you know they're going to be big. For example, most of you are aware of our superhero cardiac surgeon, Dr. Corey Adams. He's been in the media quite a few times in the last 18 months. That's because he came across by chance a couple strangers who had collapsed, and then he performed CPR on them, and he subsequently performed heart surgery on them. So obviously this is a very extraordinary story, and we pitched it to several media outlets and numerous stories were written. What may surprise you is how far the reach of this story was. Overall, there were 660 total mentions of Dr. Adams on news, radio, print media, as well as on social media platforms. It's really hard for us to determine how many people saw the story, but one station I looked at had a reach of 1.31 million folks. So I think my favorite part of this story are the keywords that were identified from this media presence, which were superhero and cardiac surgeon. The Libin Cardiovascular Institute, University of Calgary, and Foothills Medical Center were also identified as top keywords from these postings. And you can't buy this level of publicity. And well, you probably could, but we don't have the budget. So, so I have a tip for you. If something is interesting or exciting for you, you can assume it will have the same impact on others, and definitely let us know about it. So the next case study I want to chat about is about a research study on long COVID published by Dr. Satish Raj and his research team. This story demonstrates the importance of timeliness in news. So informing us of your accomplishments as soon as possible allows us to promote it in a timely manner, which is a key consideration for having your story told in the media. So the sooner the better when you have a publication. The media is interested in immediate news. So they don't want to get beat by other outlets. So this story is also timely because of its topic, which is on COVID, which has dominated the news cycle for almost 2 years. I'm working with a few of you folks. One of them is VCOS, and a few other folks on a couple stories that we've had to hold for a while. So sometimes timeliness is interesting when it fits into the news cycle. But this Dr. Raj story also shows the importance of including the patient voice. Having a patient creates personal connection and allows the audience to relate to the often complex information you are sharing. This patient, her name is Danny Pone, brought this story to life. The public cared because they related to her. So Dr. Satish Raj is a professor in the Department of Cardiac Sciences and maintains a busy clinical practice. He's a longtime mentor and supervisor and recently took on the role of education director for the Libin Institute. Dr. Raj is renowned for his work in the field of autonomic disorders such as POTS. I've personally known Dr. Raj for nearly 5 years, and I can attest to the fact that he's a great advocate for others. He regularly lets me know about awards, research publications, and grants that colleagues and students receive. He's also an excellent spokesperson for the media and a willing participant. I'm going to have Dr. Raj speak about why he shares this information with us and why he thinks self-promotion is important.
So thanks, Dawn. And I'm not sure I would have phrased it as self-promotion is important. And I think you guys have covered a lot of the critical issues well. Jason's presentation was wonderful. What I would say is that science research, I guess, is analogous to the whole, if a tree fell in the forest and no one heard it, did it make a sound argument, right? The truth is that we do things to expand knowledge, but that knowledge is only useful if it actually gets to people that can use it. So we can use it, but that impact is small. So part of the goal is communication. And the traditional model is to publish it in a scientific journal that, hopefully a few people read, hopefully a few people cite. But I think what's clear is that that model is limited. And I think that's where engaging in social media to some extent to get the word out about the work you've done, the work you hopefully you find interesting, the work you're passionate about is important. And obviously, if you can engage traditional media, that opens it up to a whole other audience. As Jason pointed out, the interesting thing about social media is that people have favorite platforms, and so you're going to get subsets of groups and not a broader audience. In many cases, my use of Twitter is to amplify some of what we're doing, to amplify some of what happens in broader organizations that we're affiliated with, the American Heart Association, Canadian Cardiovascular Society, American Autonomic Society, and also to amplify, the work and publications of our trainees, right? I mean, they spend a lot of time slogging away at research. And one of the challenges in research is that often there's no acute gratification, right? You spend a lot of time working for something that shows up later. And it's a huge accomplishment, a huge hurdle that's cleared when you finally get a publication or you finally get an award. And I think it's helpful to them, both in terms of ego, but actually in terms of career development, professional development, to have people recognize the great work they've done. And finally, we all work in many cases, multiple public institutions. Ultimately, it's the citizens of Alberta and the citizens of Canada that pay our salaries and pay for our research. And they will stop doing that if they don't think they're getting value for money. And so part of what we're doing is actually trying to point out the value we're doing. We could do great work, and if we keep it a secret and no one appreciates it, that's going to have a negative impact on us down the road, right? It's important that we keep convincing people or telling them the stories of the great work we're doing so that they see what they're supporting and continue to want to support us. That's all I have, Don.
Thanks so much, Dr. Raj. That was great. So now that we've talked about sharing stories and promoting your work, it gives us what we need to create amazing social media content to share to the world. Once we share that content, we need to amplify it on social media, and that's where you come in. We really need your help to get the word out about our world-class institute. I just want to use your reaction button and give me a green check mark if you follow any of the Libin social media accounts. A few of you there, awesome. If you aren't, you should join. Follow us. We currently have, this is our current Libin social media numbers. We have just over 2,000 Twitter followers. We're approaching 2,000 Facebook followers, 360 on Instagram followers, and 335 LinkedIn followers. Our social media presence has grown a lot in the last year. We're actually now the largest CSM institute on Facebook, but we want to keep growing and become the biggest in Canada. By sharing your stories with us and allowing us to share all the amazing things you do, it'll help us grow and expand. So currently, the Ottawa Heart Institute has over 7,000 followers on Twitter. Rather than them dominating the conversation about cardiovascular health on Twitter, we want Libin to be the go-to institute for people to get their information from cardiovascular professionals. We challenge you to help us, like, follow, share Libin content to your followers. And if you don't currently have a Twitter account, we encourage you to give it a try and become part of our community. Also encourage your family, coworkers, friends to follow us as well. The reason why we focus a lot on Twitter is that it's most commonly used in a professional space, and it's the easiest to get started working with, even if you're new to social media. Twitter is a microblogging conversational space where you can engage with like-minded people. With Twitter, you can share your work in real time, create community, meet potential collaborators, communicate with the general public, and find more readers for your work. If you have considered have considered creating an account and aren't sure where to start, I've come up with a few tips to get started. But first, let's take a look at who is using the platform. So who uses Twitter? 25 to 49-year-olds make up almost nearly 60% of all users. 85% of time spent on Twitter happens on a mobile device. Twitter has 187 million daily active users. 59% of users get their daily news from Twitter. 42% of Canadians have a Twitter account. And 99% of Twitter users also use another social network. So here's a few tips for getting started. Pick a username or handle that's simple, professional, identifiable, and easy for people to search. Pick a profile photo that's consistent with your university directory or other professional online spaces, because it shows consistency and helps people identify that it's you. Think of your Twitter bio as a brief introduction or overview. The maximum amount of characters is 160, but you can also add relevant hashtags that are affiliated with you, such as you're a member of the Libin Institute or hashtag cardiac surgery. Some employers require employees to use a disclaimer in the social media account bio to distinguish their views from the employer's views. We recommend that all researchers and clinicians put something like "opinions are my own" or "tweets are my own" in their social media bio. And you can complete your bio by including a link to a university directory, personal website, LinkedIn, Google Scholar page. And taking this step will make it easier for your audience to find out more about your expertise and professional experience. So use hashtags in your post. Might take a little research to find out the type of hashtags that work for you and the audience you want to reach. Some popular ones I've listed for you here. You can explore what other people in your field are doing on Twitter. Check out their content, what kind of hashtags they use, the accounts they follow. It's a great way to get familiar with the platform if you aren't already, and find content that you're interested in. Also, remember that it's public. You'll be aiming for a scientific audience most of the time, but keep in mind that any person can access this information. Be sure to keep it simple and professional. Twitter is a fabulous network for academics and medical professionals. It provides tremendous opportunity for an exchange of ideas with others from around the world. Have fun and engage. And most importantly, remember to tag @Libin Institute on your tweets so that we can see them. We can retweet and help amplify your posts. We'd also remember to follow us on some of our other platforms: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. If you'd like some additional tips on getting started, please check the chat. Dawn's going to put a document in there that you can download and to learn more, and if there's a few resources included in that as well. All right, so we're going to open up to any questions. So if you have anything you'd like to ask us, comments you want to make, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thanks. That was great. Not a super Twitter user, but I do tweet every now and then, and mostly tag to things. But I think that that's something that generational. But we can definitely take advantage of Twitter. So I don't know. There were some comments there that mostly there's some concerns about, misinformation. So how do we deal with that, really? Who polices some of this misinformation?
Yeah, that's hard because there's not really like a social media police force. So really it's kind of about trying to change the narrative by putting more correct information out there. I mean, really it's up to the user to try to find the information that's right. But by, you know, putting enough positive information out there, like to negate that misinformation, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Don, what do you think?
Yeah, I would always use science-based support for your posts. So, you know, if you can link to a scientific study, I know there are folks out there that will just negate even that, but I mean, I think there are enough critical thinkers out there. I'm optimistic that there's enough critical thinkers that if we keep putting out the correct information. And I thought it was really interesting what Dr. Weatherald was mentioning about, he basically has kind of went away from sharing opinions, and he just basically is now kind of putting out his science and chatting with kind of like-minded folks, and keeping in mind that the regular public can sort of watch that conversation happening. I think that's a good way of approaching it.
Okay.
Yeah, and Twitter does actually have a fairly educated user base too. Like, I think there was something around like 48% of people in the US who use Twitter or have a degree, something like that. So it definitely is like more of a academic, like there's a lot more people who are looking for information that's supported and backed by sources on Twitter, maybe not so much on Facebook as we've seen.
Well,
All right.
we have a quiet crowd. They must be all tweeting or something. That's why they don't converse with us here. Anyways, well, thank you very much. I think that's very insightful. Well, you know, we're in a very different time. When I started my career, you know, just trying to get a paper, you had to go to the library. You know, remember, I went to med school in South America, in Colombia, so we didn't get a lot of information. And, you know, it would take forever to get a paper and, you know, get information. Now we got too much information. So you never know what's the right balance. Anyways, well, thanks again. And I'm sure we will be using your abilities so that you can guide us in this new era. Any other comments? Satish, you're a big Twitter guy.
I think the key thing is when you put stuff out, and I'm probably fairly conservative, more conservative than Jason, and that is that just assume that there's no privacy, right? Everyone will see what you put out, so think twice before. You know, it's like people say about, you know, angry emails. You know, angry Twitter is probably even worse, right? You want to be cautious about what you put out. Make sure, you know, you're happy to stand behind it. But if you do it right, it's a great tool to let people know what you're doing, and by people, not just scientists, but patients, right? And for a lot of us that are involved in patient-oriented research, that's ultimately the target audience that we want to hit. And if you're afraid to go on, set up an account and just watch first, right? In the EP world, there's an EP Peeps hashtag where people put up sort of interesting, you know, ablation cases. Will put up interesting ECGs. And you know, I think a lot of my colleagues would probably agree that His bundle pacing is a pacing technique that's been around for 20 years and went nowhere, and really gained a new life by aficionados on Twitter, propelling it to the forefront. It may have been passed now by some other modified techniques, but it just shows the power of Twitter when used well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. See you next week for rounds again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Feel free to reach out to Don or myself if you have any questions.
You bet.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.